Hi everybody, how are we doing? Matt from Hannah Fields, back with a video to discuss sowing. It's that time of year, it's exciting. We're at the midpoint of February, and for me personally and us down here at the project, that is the time of the year when we start sowing our first seeds. So what we do sort of December and January, we reflect over the previous growing season and sort of take stock of how we did, where things were planted, how they did in that space, what sort of crops we can look to improve with our growing techniques, all that sort of thing. And then we map out a calendar, a growing calendar, a month by month calendar of all the vegetables we're going to grow, the quantities, when we're going to sow them, when we're going to plant them, do the overlaps, get the second crops in, all that sort of jazz, and make sure that we're organised for February. So around Valentine's Day is the marker when I sow my first seeds. And I just thought I'd discuss with you over the next sort of few minutes what seeds I sow at this time of the year and why. So obviously we're a market garden and we like to grow as seasonal as possible. So we like to grow as many vegetables that fit into that particular season at that particular time of the year. Sometimes we have vegetables that we grow sort of beyond a potential season, i.e. if we can extend our tomatoes into November, end of October we will do. So that is something of an example of slightly out of season crop, and so on and so forth. So at this time of the year is the time of year when I start sowing my first peas. So any time from sort of mid-Feb to sort of mid-March you could be sowing peas for growing for shoots or outdoor podding, and they'll give you a nice harvest as you get into June. Another crop I tend to sow first is our spring cabbages. I like a variety called Derby Day cabbage. They're a nice sort of hardy sort of round variety that are really sweet and tender, almost like a sweetheart cabbage in terms of their taste. That is one I recommend sowing, and I tend to sow that around about now, sort of as we get into the third week in Feb, and then you'll be planting that out end of March, and again end of June, early July harvest. And then as we get into this point, sort of to the fourth week, I tend to sort of start sowing things like beetroots and spring onions. So anything between sort of the 19th and 21st of February is a good time to get your beetroots and spring onions sown. And a lot of these crops that I'm firing at you, these are cold hardy crops, but also crops that I would recommend sowing at this time of year if you have access to a heat mat, for instance, or a warm environment, just to bring them seedlings along a little bit more, and have the ability to sort of put them out in the daytime to give them a 360 light around the tray. So an example of that would be like a mini greenhouse. So we have a greenhouse at home, so I do my sowings indoors. They're in our sort of kitchen diner on trays on heat mats, where they sort of chill overnight and keep warm. And then in the daytime, in the morning, I take them into the greenhouse once they've germinated and they're through, just to get the light, and I repeat that process every single day. So just a little heads up that this is all about crops that you can sort of sow indoors if you have the ability to germinate them with heat mats. And then you can start sowing things like lettuce and Asian greens at this time of year. As you get into June, you'll be harvesting those lettuces and Asian greens. With the Asian greens, I wouldn't be sowing them beyond sort of mid to late March. I'd wait until you get into sort of like later part of August, early September before you sow again, because things like Asian greens, they don't like warmth. And not only do they not like warmth, they don't do very well at that time of the year, i.e. the late summer and late spring. That is their sort of flowering time as a rule of thumb. So Mizunas, pak choys, salad rockets, that sort of thing, I'd stay away from it in the summer. As well as that, you can also be sowing other brassicas. You could be sowing things like broccoli and cauliflower and anything of the brassica family that you like to eat. I'd probably stay away from things like Swedes and anything of that sort of variety. You could be sowing things like radishes and turnips as well at this time of year, although I tend to sort of like wait till we get to the second week in sort of March before I do things like turnips, but there's nothing stopping you sowing them now. Again, like I say, doing them indoors and bringing them out sort of fourth week in March, that sort of window to plant them out. And when you do plant them out at this time of year, when you get into that third, fourth week of March, I would recommend just fleecing them over, or even getting some sort of like polythene sheeting, like what these polytunnels are made of, and creating almost like a mini sort of polytunnel sort of, you know, long strip on your growing space, and that will give you the ability to trap sort of sunlight in the day and keep that warmth in once you've planted your crops in the ground. Most of these things will withstand chilling frost that I'm firing at you, so don't worry too much if we have you know, a -2 or -3, even -4s and 5s frost overnight. Your crops will still withstand that chill. And things like spinach is a good thing to sort of plant at this time of year. Sow at this time of year. Then you can be planting that out, like I say, third week in March. So if you like your spinach, get it in now. But similar to the Asian greens, I wouldn't be sowing that for a summer harvest. Again, that's its flowering window. Wait till sort of end of August before you go with spinach again. So yeah, I just thought I'd jump on here and do a quick video and just fire some crops at you that we're sort of sowing at this time of the year. Please feel free to like, share and subscribe to this channel. I hope you find this video useful, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Lots of love, take care.